0130 hours on January 30th, 1944, 767 Rangers from the 1st and 3rd Battalions crossed the line of departure and moved into darkness toward a cisterna de Leader, Italy. They moved in single file along the Mussolini Canal drainage ditch. Complete tactical silence. No lights, no talking. Only the sound of boots and mud and equipment shifting against webbing. The temperature had dropped to near freezing. Rangers navigated by compass in absolute darkness. 3 miles ahead, the small town of Cisterna controlled road junctions essential to any Allied advance from the Anio beachhead. Intelligence reports said German defenses forward of Cisterna were thin. Scattered outposts, light resistance. The Rangers would infiltrate through German lines, seize Cisterna before dawn, and hold it until the 3rd Infantry Division attacked to link up with them. But intelligence was wrong. German forces had designated Cisterna as an assembly area for counterattack forces. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division had positioned 17 Panzer IV tanks and concealed positions around the town. The 715 Infantry Division held the ground between Allied lines and Cisterna. Field Marshal Albert Kessler had ordered every available unit to Anzio to contain the Allied beachhead. German command knew Rangers were coming. They had moved 2 full divisions and armor into positions specifically to counter the expected infiltration. This was not the thinly held outpost line American intelligence believed existed. This was a trap, and Rangers were walking straight into it. The fact that German command had moved 2 full divisions and armor specifically to counter a force of less than 800 men demonstrated something critical. The Wehrmacht feared Rangers, and they had good reason. The problem for Allied forces in Italy in 1943 was simple. German defensive positions were nearly impenetrable. Wehrmacht troops were dug into mountains, hills, and fortified towns throughout the Italian peninsula. Every advance cost hundreds of Allied lives. Every strong point required days of artillery bombardment and frontal assaults that bled divisions white. The Gustav Line south of Rome had stopped the entire Fifth Army cold. Monte Cassino had become a killing ground where Allied divisions threw themselves against German positions and died by the thousands. American and British commanders needed something different. They needed units that could bypass German defenses, attack from unexpected directions, move at night, infiltrate enemy lines, and accomplish missions that conventional infantry could not. They needed raiders, commandos, special assault troops who could do what regular infantry divisions could not do. The British had commandos, highly trained raiding forces that had conducted operations along occupied coastlines since 1940. Small unit tactics, night operations, amphibious assaults. The commandos had proven that elite light infantry could accomplish strategic objectives that entire divisions could not achieve through conventional means. But in 1942, the United States Army had no equivalent force. American infantry divisions were trained for conventional warfare, set-piece battles, frontal assaults with artillery support. They were good at what they did, but they were not trained for raids, infiltration, or commando operations. General George Marshall, Chief of Staff of the United States Army, recognized this gap. In May 1942, he approved the formation of a new unit, the 1st Ranger Battalion, named after Rogers Rangers from the French and Indian War. This new force would be modeled on British commandos, but would be American in composition and command. The mission was clear: create an elite raiding force capable of conducting operations that conventional infantry could not accomplish. Brigadier General Lucian Truscott, the United States Army liaison to British Combined Operations Headquarters, sent a cable to Major General Russell Hartley, commanding United States forces in Northern Ireland. The cable authorized immediate activation of the 1st Ranger Battalion. 2,000 men volunteered from the 34th Infantry Division and 1st Armor Division stationed in Northern Ireland. The recruits came from every part of America: farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Pennsylvania, college students from California, men looking for action, for challenge, for something more than standard infantry duty. The recruiting posters asked for volunteers for hazardous duty. No specifics, no promises, just hazardous duty. And men lined up to join. Of the 2,000 volunteers, only 600 were selected. The selection process was brutal. Physical fitness tests that eliminated half the candidates immediately. Interviews that probed motivation and character. Background checks that eliminated anyone with disciplinary problems. The Army wanted the best. Only the best would make it through. The man chosen to command this new unit was Captain William Orlando Darby, 31 years old, graduate of West Point, class of 1933, an artillery officer with no special operations experience. But Darby had something that experience could not teach: leadership, presence, the ability to inspire men to do things they did not think they could do. Within weeks of his selection, Darby was promoted to major for his work organizing the battalion. The men who passed selection arrived at Carrickfergus, Northern Ireland on June 19, 1942. Company A, 1st Ranger Battalion, was officially activated. They had uniforms, rifles, and basic infantry training. What they did not have was any idea how to be Rangers. That education would come in Scotland. In late June 1942, Darby led his 600 volunteers to the Commando Training Center at Achnacarry Castle in the Scottish Highlands. The journey began with a train ride to Fort William, followed by a 7mm forced march with full packs to the training camp. Men dropped out on the march. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Some quit. By the time the formation reached Achnacarry, 90 men had been eliminated. 510 remained. The Commando Training Center was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Vaughan, a British officer who had led commando raids and knew exactly what combat required. Vaughan's instructors were battle-hardened commando veterans who had fought in Norway, France, and North Africa. They had killed Germans. They had been shot at. They knew what worked and what got men killed. The training program was unlike anything American soldiers had experienced. Physical conditioning that made basic training look easy. Forced marches through Scottish mountains carrying 80-pound packs. Obstacle courses run at sprint speed. Rope climbs, cliff scaling, hand-to-hand combat, all conducted in the cold, rain, and mud of the Scottish Highlands. But physical conditioning was just the beginning. The real training was in tactics, night operations, moving silently through darkness, navigating by compass and stars, approaching enemy positions without being detected, learning to kill sentries quietly with knives and garrots, small unit tactics, how to maneuver as a fire team, a squad, a platoon, without radio communication, hand signals, visual coordination, trusting the man next to you to do his job while you did yours. Amphibious operations, loading into small boats in rough seas, landing on hostile beaches under fire, moving from water to objective without losing momentum or cohesion. Weapons training with every weapon the Rangers might encounter. British and American rifles, machine guns, mortars, grenades, German weapons too, because in combat you used whatever worked and ammunition came from wherever you found it. Street fighting, house-to-house clearing, room entry techniques, how to breach doors, throw grenades into enclosed spaces, and clear buildings without getting killed. Demolitions, how to blow bridges, destroy bunkers, disable artillery pieces, and sabotage supply dumps. The training used live ammunition, actual bullets fired over the heads of crawling Rangers, actual explosives detonating near moving formations. The British believed that training had to replicate combat as closely as possible. If men could function under live fire in training, they could function under live fire in combat. One Ranger was killed during training. Several others were wounded. But the 500 who completed the course at Achnacarry in September 1942 were as well trained as any infantry in the world. The first combat test came on August 19, 1942, before the full battalion had completed training. 50 Rangers under Captain Roy Murray were attached to British and Canadian forces for Operation Jubilee, the raid on deep France. The objective was to test German coastal defenses, gather intelligence, and demonstrate Allied capability to conduct amphibious raids. The operation was a disaster. German forces were alerted before the assault began. Landing craft were met with withering fire from coastal guns and machine gun positions. Canadian infantry were cut down on the beaches. Tanks bogged in shingle and were destroyed by German anti-tank guns. Of the 6,000 Allied troops that landed at DEP, more than 3,000 were killed or captured. But the Rangers assigned to No. 4 Commandos succeeded in their mission. 4 Rangers joined British commandos in an assault on the Hesse battery at Wingwil. 6 German 155 mm guns in fortified positions. The commandos and Rangers infiltrated through woods, approached from an unexpected direction, and destroyed the battery in close-quarters combat. It was the only Allied success at DEP. Second Lieutenant Edward Lustello, 23 years old from Franklin, Louisiana, was leading 7 Rangers with No. 3 Commando at Bernaville when their landing craft was engaged by German patrol boats. 3 boats made it to shore under heavy fire. Lou Slot took command when the British captain was killed. He led his Rangers and remaining commandos in an assault up steep cliffs under machine gun and mortar fire. Lustat was wounded 3 times. On the 3rd wound, while trying to suppress a German gun position, he was killed. Edward Lustat became the first American soldier to die in ground combat in the European theater of World War II. His death and the deaths of 2nd Lieutenant Joseph Randall and Technician 4th Grade Howard Henry proved something critical. Rangers would fight. They would not quit. They would not retreat. They would attack until killed. German defenders at DEP noted this in their after-action reports. American Rangers attached to commando units displayed exceptional aggression and disregard for casualties. This observation would be repeated in every subsequent engagement where Rangers fought German forces. In November 1942, the 1st Ranger Battalion deployed to North Africa as part of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French Morocco in Algeria. The Rangers were assigned a critical mission: capture the coastal batteries at Arzew, Algeria, before they could fire on the invasion fleet. 2 batteries, the Battery Denner and Battery Dissous, French colonial troops loyal to Vichy, France, manning the positions. The Rangers would land at night, infiltrate inland, and attack both batteries simultaneously from behind before dawn. At 0 hours on November 8, 1942, 2 companies of Rangers landed on beaches east of Arzew in complete darkness. They moved inland using compass navigation. No lights, no noise, complete tactical silence. Company Able moved north toward the Battery Dunnord. Company Baker moved south toward the Battery Dud. Both companies approached their objectives undetected. At 0330 hours, both Ranger companies assaulted their objectives simultaneously. The French defenders were caught completely by surprise. Rangers came over the walls with grenades and rifle fire, close-quarters combat, and gun emplacements, hand-to-hand fighting in bunkers. Within 20 minutes, both batteries were secured. 40 French soldiers captured. No Ranger casualties. The invasion fleet landed unopposed at Arzew. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander Allied Forces, noted the Ranger success in his reports. 1st Ranger Battalion had accomplished its mission with precision and aggression that exceeded expectations. But it was the next operation that made German forces take notice. In February 1943, the 1st Rangers conducted the first American behind-the-lines raid of the war at Senate Station, Tunisia. German and Italian forces held a fortified outpost in mountainous terrain. Allied intelligence needed information about enemy strength and dispositions. A frontal assault would cost hundreds of casualties. Darby proposed a night infiltration raid. 3 Ranger companies would march 12 miles through enemy territory at night, approach Senate from the rear, assault at dawn, capture prisoners, destroy the position, and withdraw before German reinforcements arrived. On the night of February 10th to 11th, 200 Rangers moved out from Allied lines. They navigated through darkness across rough terrain, bypassing Italian outposts, moving in tactical silence. At dawn on February 11th, the Rangers assaulted Senate Station from 3 directions simultaneously. The Italian garrison was taken completely by surprise. Rangers swept through this position with grenades, rifles, and close combat. 11 Italians killed, 11 captured, including 1 officer who provided valuable intelligence. The Rangers destroyed supply dumps, disabled equipment, and withdrew before German forces could respond. Total Ranger casualties were 1 man wounded. The raid demonstrated everything that made Rangers effective: night infiltration, surprise, aggression, precise execution, rapid withdrawal. Conventional infantry would have required artillery preparation, air support, and a frontal assault that would have alerted every German unit in the area. Rangers did it with stealth and violence of action that gave the enemy no time to respond. The operation that established Ranger reputation beyond any doubt came in March 1943 at El Watar, Tunisia. American forces under General George Patton were stopped cold by German defenses in mountainous terrain. The key position was Jebel Elk, a fortified hill that dominated the approaches to El Gadir. 2 American infantry battalions had assaulted the position and been shot to pieces. German machine guns and concrete bunkers covered every approach. Artillery fire from concealed positions destroyed anything that moved in daylight. The hill was considered impregnable to frontal assault. Patton gave the mission to the Rangers. Darby studied the terrain and proposed a night approach march. The Rangers would move 12 miles around the German flank through unmapped mountain terrain at night, climb the backside of Jebel Elk in darkness, and assault at dawn from the direction the Germans did not expect to be attacked. On the night of March 20th, the entire 1st Ranger Battalion moved out. They navigated by compass through mountains with no trails. They climbed rocky slopes carrying full combat loads. They maintained noise discipline, so complete that German sentries less than 100 meters away heard nothing. At dawn on March 21st, 6 companies of Rangers assaulted Jebel Lank from the rear. The German defenders were facing the opposite direction, positioned to repel frontal assaults from the valley. Rangers came over the crest of the hill with rifles, grenades, and bayonets, close combat in trenches and bunkers. Germans tried to turn their weapons around, but Rangers were already inside their positions. Within 2 hours, Jebel Lank was in American hands. 200 German prisoners, minimal Ranger casualties. Patton now had his breakthrough. American armor poured through the gap the Rangers had created. The Battle of El Gadir became the first major American victory against German forces in World War II. And it was Rangers who made it possible. German intelligence reports from Tunisia noted the 1st Ranger Battalion as a significant threat. Small unit, lightly armed, but exceptionally well-trained and led, capable of night infiltration operations that bypassed German defensive positions, willing to close with German forces in hand-to-hand combat, did not retreat under fire. German commanders began planning defenses with the assumption that Rangers might appear anywhere from any direction at any time. The success of the 1st Ranger Battalion led to rapid expansion. In April 1943, Darby was ordered to form 2 additional battalions. The 3rd and 4th Ranger Battalions were activated in North Africa, using volunteers from 7th Army units that had combat experience. Darby provided the cadre. Officers and non-commissioned officers from the 1st Battalion became the training staff for the new units. In 3 weeks, Darby trained 2 new Ranger battalions to the same standards as the 1st. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 saw all 3 Ranger battalions in action. The 1st and 4th Rangers landed at Gela ahead of the 1st Infantry Division. Their mission was to secure the port and neutralize Italian coastal defenses before the main landing force came ashore. In darkness on July 10, 1943, Rangers landed on hostile beaches under fire from Italian pillboxes. They assaulted directly off the landing craft with rifle fire and grenades. Italian defenders fired from concrete bunkers, but Rangers closed the distance faster than the Italians could respond. Within 4 hours, Gala was in Ranger hands, but German forces responded immediately. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division counterattacked with Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks. 46 medium tanks rolling toward the beach to drive the invasion force back into the sea. The Rangers had no anti-tank weapons heavier than bazookas and grenades. Naval gunfire from destroyers offshore provided support, but German tanks pressed the attack. Darby organized a defensive line using every available weapon. Rangers with bazookas fired at point-blank range. Naval fire directed by Ranger forward observers destroyed tanks as they approached the town. Hand-to-hand fighting in the streets of Gala. German infantry and Rangers fighting Hasido House. The battle lasted 2 days. German tanks reached to within 300 meters of the beach before Ranger bazooka teams and naval gunfire stopped the advance. When the Hermann Göring Division finally withdrew, 17 German tanks lay destroyed in and around Gela. The Rangers had held. They had stopped a panzer division with rifles, grenades, and naval support. That defensive action at Gela reinforced German respect for Ranger capabilities. In September 1943, Rangers landed at Salerno, Italy, ahead of the main invasion force. Their mission was to seize and hold Sciurione Pass, the key terrain that controlled the roads inland from the beachhead. German forces were expected to counterattack through the pass to drive Allied forces back into the sea. The Rangers had to hold the pass until the main force could reinforce them. At 3:30 hours on September 9, 1943, Rangers landed at Maori and moved inland immediately. They reached Chunzi Pass before German forces realized the invasion had begun. Rangers dug into defensive positions on the high ground overlooking the pass. When German counterattacks came, Rangers were waiting. For 13 days, Rangers held Chunzi Pass against continuous German assaults, artillery barges, infantry attacks, probing actions at night. The Germans threw everything they had at the Rangers, trying to break through. Ranger positions were under constant fire. Casualties mounted daily. Ammunition ran low. Food and water were rationed. But the Rangers did not give ground. Not 1 meter. German forces noted in their reports that American Rangers at Chunzi Pass fought with tenacity that exceeded normal infantry standards. Positions that should have been overrun held out under sustained attack. Counterattacks were launched from defensive positions with aggressiveness unexpected from defending forces. Wounded Rangers continued fighting. The pass held until the 5th Army broke through from Cerno and relieved the Rangers on September 22nd. By that point, Darby's Ranger force at Chunzi had grown from battalion to brigade size as other units were attached to the Rangers during the fighting. Darby was effectively commanding a force of 8,500 men. But the Corps, the Rangers who held the critical ground, numbered less than 2,000. And they had done what entire divisions sometimes could not do. They had held ground against overwhelming German attacks and refused to break. That reputation, that identity as troops who did not retreat, who fought harder than conventional infantry, who accomplished missions others could not accomplish, was exactly what made German forces wary of Rangers. But the operation that cemented Ranger reputation in German minds was the disaster at Sesterna. In January 1944, Allied forces landed at Anzio on the Italian coast north of the Gustav Line. The objective was to bypass German defenses, land behind German lines, and drive inland to cut German supply routes. The landing succeeded. 36,000 troops came ashore with minimal opposition, but the Allied commander, Major General John Lucas, hesitated. Instead of driving inland immediately, Lucas consolidated the beachhead. German forces responded with exceptional speed. Field Marshal Albert Kessler ordered every available unit to Anzio. Within days, 8 German divisions were moving into positions around the Allied beachhead. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division, the 3 Panzer Grenadier Division, the 71st Infantry Division, the 4 Parachute Division, elite German forces. Kessel Ring intended to contain the Allied beachhead and then counterattack to drive the invasion force into the sea. Lucas needed a breakthrough. He needed to expand the beachhead before German forces completed their encirclement. The objective was Sesterna d'Ettoria, a small town that controlled road junctions essential to any advance inland. The mission went to the Rangers. The 1st and 3rd Ranger battalions would infiltrate through German lines at night, moving 5 miles behind enemy lines along drainage ditches. They would seize Sesterna, in a surprise assault before dawn and hold it until the 3rd Infantry Division attacked to link up with them. The 4th Ranger Battalion would attack along the road to clear the main approach. The intelligence estimate said German defenses forward of Cesterna were thin, scattered outposts, light resistance. The main German defensive line was believed to be behind Cesterna, not in front of it. The intelligence was completely wrong. German forces had designated Cerna as an assembly area for counterattack forces. The Hermann and Göring Panzer Division had moved tanks and infantry into positions around the town. The 715 Infantry Division held the ground between the Allied lines and Cisna. Instead of lightly held outposts, Rangers would be infiltrating directly into the main German defensive concentration. At 0130 hours on January 30th, 1944, the 1st and 30 Ranger battalions crossed the line of departure and moved into no man's land. 767 Rangers in single-file column moving along the Mussolini Canal drainage ditch. They navigated in complete darkness. No lights, no noise. Tactical silence, absolute. They passed within meters of German positions without being detected. For the first 3 miles, the infiltration went perfectly. Rangers bypassed German sentries, crossed obstacles, maintained formation without verbal communication. But at 0600 hours, as dawn approached, the drainage ditch ended. The Rangers were still 800 m from Cerna. Open ground lay between them and the objective. Flat fields with no cover, and daylight was coming. The Rangers had 2 choices: stay in the ditch and wait for darkness, or cross the open ground before full daylight revealed them. Staying in the ditch meant giving up surprise. The Germans would discover them. Crossing in twilight gave them a chance to reach Cerna before German forces fully reacted. The Rangers crossed the open ground. German sentries spotted them immediately. Alarm whistles sounded. Machine guns opened fire, and the Rangers found themselves in the middle of a massive German defensive position. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division had 17 Panzer for tanks concealed in Cesterna. The 715 Infantry Division had infantry positions on 3 sides of the Rangers. Instead of infiltrating behind German lines, Rangers had infiltrated directly into the largest German force concentration in the entire Anzio sector. The battle that followed lasted 8 hours. Rangers fought from drainage ditches, from farmhouses, from shell craters, from anywhere that offered cover. German tanks maneuvered to cut off escape routes. German infantry closed in from all sides. Artillery fire from German batteries began landing on Ranger positions. The 4th Ranger Battalion tried to fight through to rescue the trap battalions, but German positions stopped the relief force cold. Tanks, machine guns, minefields. The 4th Rangers could not break through. The 3rd Infantry Division attacked, but could not reach Cerna. German defenses held against every assault. By afternoon, ammunition was exhausted. Rangers had fired every round. Bazookas empty, grenades gone, rifles down to last magazines. The 1st and 3rd Battalions were surrounded with no possibility of reinforcement or escape. Major Alva Miller, commander of the 3rd Battalion, was killed leading a counterattack. Major John Dobson, commander of the 1st Battalion, was severely wounded. German forces called for surrender. The Rangers refused. They fought with bayonets and rifle butts, hand-to-hand combat in ditches. Germans brought tanks forward and fired point-blank into Ranger positions. By late afternoon on January 30th, organized resistance ended. Of 767 Rangers who began the infiltration, only 6 made it back to Allied lines. 12 were killed in action, 36 were wounded, 743 were captured. The 4th Ranger Battalion suffered 30 killed and 58 wounded trying to reach the trapped units. Darby's Ranger force was effectively destroyed. The 1st, 3rd, and 4th Ranger Battalions were disbanded. Surviving Rangers were assigned to other units or sent home to train new formations. But German forces noted something important in their after-action reports. Even when surrounded, outnumbered, out of ammunition, facing tanks at close range, Rangers continued fighting. They did not surrender until physically incapable of resistance. Individual Rangers fought to the death rather than give up positions. Small groups counterattacked against impossible odds. Even after officers were killed and units were broken into isolated pockets, Rangers kept fighting. German intelligence noted that American Rangers displayed combat motivation and determination that exceeded standard Wehrmacht infantry and approached Waffen-SS levels. That assessment from an enemy that respected combat effectiveness above all else defined what Rangers had become. An elite force that fought harder, accepted higher risk, and accomplished missions that conventional forces could not accomplish, but at terrible cost. Cerna was the worst Ranger defeat of World War II. But it was not the end of Rangers. The 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions, formed in 1943 in the United States, trained at Camp Forest, Tennessee, under Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder. Ruhr, 33 years old, former high school football coach from Texas, had no commando experience when he took command of the 2nd Rangers. But, like Darby, Ruhr had leadership, and he had studied everything the 1st Rangers had learned in combat. The 2nd and 5th Rangers arrived in England in January 1944. They trained with British commandos at Aniakari, just like the 1st Rangers. Live fire exercises, cliff climbing, night operations, small boat handling. The mission they trained for was unlike anything Rangers had attempted before. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, Rangers would assault Pointe du Hoc, a 100-foot cliff on the Normandy coast. German intelligence reported 6 155mm guns and concrete emplacements at the top of the cliff. Those guns could fire on both Utah and Omaha beaches. They could destroy landing craft, kill troops on the beaches, disrupt the entire invasion. The guns had to be destroyed before the main landing force came ashore, and the only way to reach them was to climb the cliff under fire. The 2nd Ranger Battalion trained for 3 months on cliffs along the English coast. They tested every climbing technique: rope ladders, rocket-fired grappling hooks, fire ladders borrowed from the London Fire Brigade. They practiced until they could climb a 100-foot cliff in under 5 minutes. But training could not replicate what they would face at Pointe du Hoc. German defenders on top of the cliff throwing grenades down, machine gun fire from flanking positions, mortar fire from inland batteries. The climb would happen in daylight, under direct observation, with no cover and no concealment. At 0445 hours on June 6, 1944, 225 Rangers from Companies D, E, and F of the 2nd Battalion loaded into British landing craft and headed toward Pointe du Hoc. The naval bombardment had been pounding the cliff top for an hour. Battleship shells and destroyer fire, but German defenses were intact. The landing craft approached the cliff base under heavy fire. German machine guns swept the small boats. Mortar rounds landed in the water around the craft. Rangers returned fire with Browning automatic rifles as the boats closed on the beach. At 0710 hours, landing craft grounded on the narrow beach at the base of the cliff. Rangers jumped into waist-deep water and ran for the cliff face. German grenades fell from above. Rifle fire from the cliff edge. Rangers fired rocket grapples. Ropes shot up the cliff face. Some caught, some fell back. Germans cut ropes as they were fired. Rangers climbed on the ropes that held hand over hand. 100-foot climb with full combat gear. Men fell when ropes were cut. Others kept climbing. German defenders threw grenades over the edge. Rangers on the cliff face could not take cover. They climbed faster. Some reached the top in under 3 minutes. The 1st Rangers over the cliff edge opened fire with automatic rifles, killing German defenders and driving others back from the cliff edge. More Rangers reached the top. 30 minutes after landing, 90 Rangers had climbed the cliff and were engaging German positions on the plateau. But when Rangers reached the gun emplacements, they found them empty. The massive concrete casemates held only telephone poles painted to look like gun barrels from the air. Allied intelligence had been deceived. The real guns had been moved inland days before the invasion. Ranger patrols pushed inland, looking for guns. Sergeant Leonard Lammel and Sergeant Jack led a patrol south along a hedgerow toward a dirt road. 250 yards from a coastal highway, Lammel found 5 of the 6 155mm guns positioned in an orchard camouflaged with netting, ready to fire on the beaches. German crews were nowhere in sight. Lammel and moved in quietly. Lammel destroyed 2 guns by smashing their traversing and elevating mechanisms with thermite grenades. He disabled the sights and mechanisms on the others. A second patrol led by Staff Sergeant Frank Rapinski from Company E found and disabled the 6th gun. All 6 guns were rendered useless. The mission accomplished, but the Rangers on Point D Hawk were now surrounded. German forces counterattacked from 3 directions. Artillery, fire from inland batteries pounded Ranger positions. German infantry probed the Ranger perimeter at night. Casualties mounted. Ammunition ran low. Food and water were exhausted. Communications equipment was destroyed in the landing. No one knew if the Rangers on Point D Hawk were alive or dead. For 2 days, Rangers held Point D Hawk against continuous German attacks. They fought from shell craters and shattered bunkers. Wounded Rangers stayed on the firing line. The defensive perimeter shrank as German pressure increased. By June 8th, only 90 Rangers were still able to fight. Of the 225 who had climbed the cliff, 77 were dead. 152 were wounded. The remainder were exhausted, out of ammunition, and surrounded, but they held. When relief forces finally reached Point D Hawk on the morning of June 8th, Rangers were still in defensive positions, still fighting, still refusing to give ground. The 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions continued fighting across France through the summer of 1944. Hill 400 in the Hirken Forest. Rangers assaulted a fortified German position on steep slopes and winter conditions. Other American units had tried and failed. Rangers attacked at night, climbed the hill under fire, and took the summit in close combat. They held against German counterattacks for 3 days before being relieved. The assault cost the Rangers 225 casualties out of 470 men engaged, but they took the objective and held it. German soldiers who fought Rangers in Normandy, in the Hirken Forest, in the advance across France, reported in prisoner interrogations that Rangers were recognized as elite assault troops. German forces identified Rangers by their aggressive tactics, their willingness to accept casualties to accomplish missions, and their refusal to retreat under fire. Wehrmacht intelligence officers noted that Rangers appeared to have better training than standard American infantry. They operated in smaller units with less support, but achieved results disproportionate to their numbers. German commanders learned to reinforce sectors where Rangers were identified. A single Ranger battalion required defensive preparations that would normally be used against an entire American division. Because Rangers did not follow conventional tactics, they attacked at night. They infiltrated through defensive lines. They appeared from unexpected directions. And once engaged, they fought until the position was taken or until every Ranger was dead or wounded. The pattern repeated throughout 1944 and 45. Rangers spearheaded assaults. They took objectives that other units could not take. They paid for their success with casualty rates that would have destroyed conventional infantry units, but they kept fighting. After the war, German officers were interviewed by American intelligence about enemy forces they had faced. Rangers were consistently mentioned as one of the most effective Allied special operations forces, comparable to British commandos and Soviet Guards units in terms of combat effectiveness and motivation, better trained than standard American infantry, more aggressive than most German infantry, willing to close with German forces in hand-to-hand combat rather than rely on artillery and air support. The assessment from German prisoners was consistent. You knew when you were fighting Rangers because they kept coming. They did not stop. They did not retreat. You had to kill every Ranger or they would kill you. That reputation was built on operations like Elgader and Point D Hawk. But it was also built on hundreds of smaller actions where Rangers did what conventional infantry could not do. Infiltration patrols that captured prisoners from positions other units could not reach. Night raids that destroyed supply dumps behind German lines. Assaults on fortified positions that cleared the way for main force advances. Every operation reinforced the same pattern. Rangers accomplished missions at high cost, but they accomplished them. William Darby did not survive the war. On April 30th, 1945, Darby was Assistant Division Commander of the 10th Mountain Division in northern Italy. German forces were collapsing, but still fighting. Darby was standing outside a command post in Torb when a German 88mm shell exploded 30 feet away. Shrapnel struck Darby in the heart. He died 2 minutes later, 2 days before Germany surrendered. George Patton said of Darby that he was the bravest man Patton had ever known. Lucian Truscott, who had authorized the creation of Rangers in 1942, called Darby one of the finest soldiers in the United States Army. Darby was posthumously promoted to brigadier general. His name is on ranger schools, ranger facilities, and memorials across America. But in 1945, his death was just another casualty in the final days of the war. James Ruhr survived. He commanded the 2nd Rangers through D-Day and into December 1944, when he took command of the 109th Infantry Regiment. Ruhr stayed in the Army Reserve after the war and became president of Texas A and M University in 1959. He died in 1970. Every year on June 6th, surviving Rangers from Pointed Edu Hawk gathered at the cliff in Normandy, fewer each year as age and time took their toll. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan visited Pointe du Hoc for the 40th anniversary of D-Day. 62 Rangers who had climbed the cliff were there. Reagan spoke at the site. He called them the Boys of Pointe du Hoc, the men who took the cliffs, the champions who helped free a continent, the heroes who helped end a war. Those words captured what Rangers represented. Not just elite soldiers, not just special operations forces, but men who did what needed to be done regardless of cost, who took objectives others could not take, who fought when fighting seemed impossible, who climbed cliffs under fire because that was the mission. The Rangers of World War II were disbanded after the war ended. The Army decided that special operations forces were not needed in peacetime. Ranger battalions were deactivated. Training centers were closed. The lessons learned were filed away. But the need for Rangers returned in Korea, in Vietnam, in every conflict where conventional forces needed elite light infantry to accomplish missions that required special training and exceptional motivation. The 75th Ranger Regiment, formed in 1974, carries the lineage of the World War II Ranger battalions. The scroll they wear comes from Darby's Rangers. The training they undergo follows the same principles established at Aniakari. Physical conditioning, small unit tactics, night operations, live fire exercises, the expectation that Rangers will accomplish missions others cannot accomplish. The standard that Rangers do not retreat, they do not surrender, they complete the mission or die trying. The question of why German forces feared Rangers more than other Allied units has a simple answer. Germans feared Rangers because Rangers were different, not better armed, not more numerous, not supported by better artillery or air power. Rangers were feared because they fought differently. They accepted risk that conventional infantry avoided. They attacked from directions no one expected. They operated at night when other forces stayed in defensive positions. They closed with German forces in hand-to-hand combat when other forces called for artillery support. They kept fighting when other units would have retreated. And most importantly, Rangers accomplished missions. Every single time Rangers were given an objective, they took it. At Arzo, Senate Station, Elgader, Gala, Salerno, Pointe du Hoc, Hill 400. Rangers took the objective, sometimes at terrible cost. Sesterna was a disaster that destroyed 3 Ranger battalions. But even at Sesterna, Rangers fought until physically unable to continue. German forces learned that Rangers could not be intimidated, could not be bluffed, could not be scared into retreating. You had to kill Rangers, and killing Rangers required overwhelming force. That was the source of German fear. not fear of Rangers as superhuman soldiers, but fear of Rangers as soldiers who would not quit, who would keep fighting no matter what, who would take casualties that would break other units and keep attacking. German tactical doctrine relied on defensive positions strong enough to stop Allied attacks, machine guns and concrete bunkers, artillery fires on pre-registered impact zones, minefields, and obstacles that channeled attackers into kill zones. Those defenses stopped conventional Allied infantry. They slowed attacks. They forced Allied commanders to bring up more artillery, more air support, more troops. German forces could trade space for time because Allied attacks were predictable. But Rangers were not predictable. They went around defenses. They infiltrated through defensive lines. They attacked at night from the rear. They bypassed strong points and struck objectives directly. German forces could not rely on defensive positions to stop Rangers because Rangers did not attack defensive positions the way conventional infantry attacked defensive positions. And when Rangers did attack defended positions directly, like at Point de Hoc or Hill 400, they did it with such speed and violence that German defenders did not have time to develop effective responses. Rangers were on top of German positions before defensive fires could be organized. Close combat, grenades, bayonets, fighting at ranges where German advantages in machine guns and artillery did not matter. That combination of unconventional tactics and extreme aggression made Rangers uniquely dangerous to German forces. Not because Rangers were invincible. They took casualties. They suffered defeats. But because Rangers were unpredictable and relentless. You never knew where Rangers would attack. You never knew when they would come. And once they came, they would not stop until the mission was accomplished or until every Ranger was dead. That uncertainty, that knowledge that Rangers might appear anywhere from any direction at any time and would fight to the death, once engaged, created psychological pressure that conventional forces did not create. German units facing Rangers had to maintain higher alert levels. They had to defend in all directions. They had to assume that any nighttime movement might be a Ranger infiltration. They had to prepare for attacks from unexpected directions. The cost of that defensive posture was exhaustion, stress, reduced effectiveness of German forces that had to guard against Ranger operations. One Ranger battalion required German defensive preparations equivalent to facing an entire American division. Not because Rangers had equivalent firepower, but because Rangers created disproportionate threat through tactics and aggression. That force multiplier effect was exactly what the United States Army wanted when it created Rangers in 1942. A small elite force that could accomplish strategic missions without requiring division size resources. Rangers proved the concept worked. They proved that properly trained and led infantry could achieve results far beyond their numbers. They proved that aggression, speed, and unconventional tactics could defeat superior German defensive positions. And they proved that American soldiers, given the right training and leadership, could match or exceed any military force in the world. That legacy continues in today's 75th Ranger Regiment. The training, the standards, the expectation that Rangers lead the way. That phrase, Rangers lead the way, came from Omaha Beach on D-Day. When the 29th Infantry Division was pinned down by German fire, unable to advance off the beach, Brigadier General Norman Cota found Ranger companies mixed with the division. Cota asked what unit they were. They replied, 5th Rangers. Cota said, "Well, then Rangers lead the way." And they did. Rangers moved off the beach, cleared German positions, and opened paths for the 29th Division to advance. That moment captured in unit histories and memoirs defined what Rangers represented. When conventional forces could not advance, Rangers led the way. When missions seemed impossible, Rangers accomplished them. When fighting required extreme risk and exceptional courage, Rangers volunteered. The Rangers of World War II were not superhumans. They were ordinary American soldiers who underwent extraordinary training and accepted missions that required extraordinary sacrifice. They came from farms and factories and cities across America. They volunteered for hazardous duty. They trained harder than any infantry in the world. They fought in every theater of World War II, and they established a reputation that made German forces change their tactics, reinforce their positions, and prepare specifically for Ranger operations. That is why German troops feared United States Army Rangers more than other Allied units. Not because Rangers were invincible, but because Rangers were relentless, unpredictable, and willing to pay any price to accomplish the mission. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share these important military histories with more people who appreciate the sacrifices made by these soldiers. Subscribe to stay connected with more stories from World War II. Each one deserves to be remembered. Each one teaches us something about courage, leadership, and the price of freedom. We would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from, or if you have connections to World War II history through family or research. Our community includes veterans, military historians, and people from around the world who value these stories. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping keep these histories alive.